The 10th of November, 1918. Kaiser Wilhelm II boards a train destined for a foreign land, fleeing both the enemy and the wrath of his own people. The account of the once mighty German Empire was, for all practical purposes, closed. But how did it come to this point? I'm the Enlightened Edelweiss, and this is the fifth of a series of videos centered around the decline and fall of the German Empire. If you haven't watched the first 4 episodes, the link can be found on the top right corner of the screen. We last left off at the start of the Great War, with Germany along with Austria-Hungary at war with Serbia, Russia, and France. Britain at this point hadn't gotten involved with the conflict. The Germans, naturally, weren't particularly keen on fighting a two-front war with both France and Russia. Luckily, they had a plan. The so-called Schlieffen plan was devised by the Chief of the German General Staff from 1891 until 1906, Alfred von Schlieffen, and modified by the new Chief of the General Staff, Helmut von Moltke the Younger. It involved 73 divisions of the German army bypassing French defenses in the heavily fortified section of the border that ran between Luxembourg and Switzerland by sweeping through Belgium and encircling Paris with 3 armies from the north. It was estimated that this could be achieved in a mere 6 weeks, after which France would be knocked out of the war and all military focus could be exerted on defeating Russia. The only real issue with the plan seemed to be that Belgium was neutral, and violating its neutrality could result in drawing Britain into the war, who was guaranteeing Belgian independence. Yet it seemed to German officials in 1914 that there was no other option available to them. Therefore, on the 2nd of August, 34 corps of German troops marched into Belgium, encountering fierce Belgian resistance. Britain, true to its word, declared war on Germany on the 4th of August, sending in the British Expeditionary Force, led by Sir John French. Belgian resistance, coupled with the arrival of the British, greatly broke discipline among the ranks of the German army, and battles at Liège and Antwerp did much to blunt their momentum, though ultimately they failed to completely halt the advance. These breakdowns of discipline led to some serious atrocities, notably on the 25th of August, when German soldiers murdered 250 civilians of the University of Leuven and burned down the library. Such acts cemented the image of the barbaric and uncivilized German soldier, often seen in British propaganda. The French, meanwhile, relied on a strategy of all-out attack that resulted in appalling casualties, with 2 colonial divisions suffering a total of 11,650 losses in a single day. In the north, they were subjected to 2 weeks of continuous retreat, though they did slightly slow the German advance at the Battle of Guise on the 28th of August. By early September, German forces had managed to cross the Marne River and now posed a serious threat to the French capital. Seeing this, commander of the French armies on the Western Front, Joseph Joffre, decided that he had had enough and completely abandoned the earlier French plan, going on to conduct a vast purge of failed generals. He then rapidly pulled together forces, creating the French Sixth Army. Alexander von Kluck, the commander of the German First Army, made a massive blunder when he maneuvered his army to pass the east of Paris rather than the west. This exposed his flank, allowing Joffre to launch a massive counteroffensive, resulting in the First Battle of the Marne, a decisive victory for the Entente that ran from the 5th to the 12th of September, and pushed German forces back behind the river Aisne, resulting in a complete halt of their offensive and the effective failure of the Schlieffen plan. The German army went on to entrench themselves behind the river, where the fighting descended into static trench warfare, in which neither side could gain the upper hand. The reasons for the failure of the Schlieffen plan can be brought down to the fact that it was a largely overambitious plan to begin with, which was compounded by the poor state of German logistics, which relied heavily on horse-drawn transport, and their failure to foresee the Entente's use of the French railway network to transport troops. Additionally, the incompetence of Field Marshal Moltke was brought to light considerably, especially when contrasted with the dynamism of General Joffre. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, the situation wasn't particularly favorable either. The Germans hadn't expected the Russians to attack for a while, so they were caught completely off guard when the Russians attacked a mere 2 weeks after the war began, on the 15th of August. Defended only by the 153,000 men of the 8th Army, with a total of 391,000 Russians advancing rapidly toward them, the situation seemed hopeless. However, the Russians' incompetent use of radio, coupled with the terrain and the superiority of German generals such as Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff, resulted in a decisive German victory over the Russian Second Army at the Battle of Tannenberg that ran from the 26th to the 30th of August, 1914. Following the battle, Ludendorff and Hindenburg turned their gaze to the north and engaged the Russian First Army, going on to defeat them at the Battle of the Masurian Lakes, driving the invaders off German soil. The victories achieved by Hindenburg and Ludendorff would propel them to celebrity status and allow military elites to later construct the so-called stab-in-the-back myth that would allege that Germany lost the war because of a conspiracy by a defeatist civilian population and their politicians, and that Germany could have fought on had it not been denied crucial resources and support from them. The victories also brought significant hope to the German people that the war would certainly be won. However, while the Eastern Front was beginning to turn around for the Germans, the situation in the West remained undecisive. Both sides repeatedly attempted to outflank the other by racing further north in what came to be known as the Race to the Sea. This was a costly affair, as both sides sustained immense casualties, with German losses exceeding 130,000 in the First Battle of Ypres. In the end, no side managed to gain the advantage, and the war settled into a deadly stalemate. These first few months were extremely costly for the Germans, with casualties numbering up to 800,000 from August 1914 to January 1915, out of which estimates for the number of deaths range from 116,000 to 240,000. 1914 saw the breakdown of the Schlieffen Plan and the beginning of the stalemate on the Western Front. There was a shred of hope in the form of the victories achieved in the East. However, it was by now clear that the war perhaps wouldn't end as soon as had been thought. The following year would result in the most ingenious and brutal methods of war seen till that point, in the numerous attempts to break the deadlock.